Ming Dynasty. When the Yuan dynasty collapsed, the Ming dynasty restored native rule to China. Hongwu, founder of the Ming dynasty, drove the Mongols out of China and built a tightly centralized state. The Emperor Yongle launched a series of naval expeditions that sailed throughout the Indian Ocean basin. In 1421, Yongle moved the capital from Nanjing to Beijing so as to keep closer watch on the Mongols and other nomadic peoples in the north. However, Mongol forces massacred several Chinese armies in the 1440s, and in 1449 they captured the Ming Emperor himself. Thousands of workers labored throughout the late 15th and 16th centuries to build a stone wall that ran about 1,550 miles. The Great Wall was 33 to 49 feet high. The government-sponsored study of Chinese cultural traditions provided financial support for educational systems and restored the system of civil service examinations. The emperor sometimes ignored government affairs for decades. Eunuchs gained increasing power, and as this happened, corruption and inefficiency weakened the Ming state. In 1644, rebel forces captured the Ming capital at Beijing. Manchu invaders allied with an army loyal to the Ming, crushed the rebels, and recovered Beijing. The Manchus replaced the Ming dynasty with their own government. Qing Dynasty. The Manchus ruled China under the Qing dynasty until the early 20th century. A chieftain named Nurhaci unified Manchu tribes into a centralized state, promulgated a code of laws, and organized a powerful military force. The Manchu army expelled Ming garrisons in Manchuria, captured Korea and Mongolia, and launched small-scale invasions into China. They not only outlawed intermarriage between Manchus and Chinese, but also forbade Chinese from traveling to Manchuria and from learning the Manchurian language. The Qing dynasty had two important leaders during this time: Kangxi, the Confucian scholar and conqueror, and Qianlong, his grandson who continued his conquest and made Vietnam, Burma, and Nepal vassal states of the Qing dynasty. His reign marked the height of the Qing dynasty. Scholar bureaucrats and civil service examinations. The emperor appointed scholar gentries to govern day-to-day. These scholars were chosen by the king after they took an exam called the civil service exam. The civil service exam was exclusively for boys and men. Preparation started at an extremely young age. By 11, most participants had memorized all of the Chinese characters and actively met with tutors. It was highly competitive. Only 300 candidates could pass, and most only earned a degree after several tries. Participants would be shown to cell-like rooms in which they would write the 8-legged essay. For several days and 2 nights. There was no talking at all. Participants would bring their own food and whatnot. If one of them died, they would be wrapped in a mat and tossed out the window to the other side of the wall. After acquiring a civil service degree, one would have to also pass the metropolitan exam if they wanted any sort of position in the government. The examinations guaranteed that Confucianism would be at the heart of Chinese education and that Confucians would govern the state.
The patriarchal family. Like the examination system and Chinese societal filial piety government, the Chinese family was hierarchical, patriarchal, and authoritarian. Within the family, Confucian principles subjected women to the authority of men. A boy might have the opportunity to take the official examinations, become a government official, and thereby bring honor and financial reward to the entire clan. Parents regarded a girl as a social and financial liability. During the Ming and Qing dynasties, patriarchal authority over females probably became tighter than ever before in China. Moreover, foot binding, a custom that probably originated in the Song dynasties, became exceptionally popular during the late Ming and Qing dynasties. Population growth and economic development. China was a predominantly agricultural society, a fact that meshed agreeably with the Confucian view that land was a source of everything praiseworthy. On its strong agrarian foundation, China supported a large population and built the most highly commercialized economy of the pre-industrial world. Global trade brought prosperity to China, especially during the early Qin dynasty. Compensation for exports came most importantly in the form of silver bullion, which supported the silver-based Chinese economy and fueled manufacturing. China's economic expansion took place largely in the absence of technological innovation. Gentry, commoners, soldiers, and mean people. Except for the emperor and his family, scholar bureaucrats and gentry occupied the most exalted positions in Chinese society. Confucian traditions ranked 3 broad classes of commoners below the gentry: peasants, artisans, or workers, and merchants. By far, the biggest class consisted of peasants, a designation that covered everyone from day laborers to tenant farmers to petty landlords. Artisans and workers were usually employees of the state or of gentry and self-merchant families, but they also pursued their occupations as self-employed persons. Merchants, from street peddlers to individuals of enormous wealth and influence, ranked at the bottom level of Confucian societal hierarchy. Beyond the Confucian societal hierarchy were members of the military forces and the so-called mean people. The mean people included slaves, indentured servants, entertainers, prostitutes, and other marginal groups.
The Ming and Qing emperors used Chinese traditions as a guide in building their cultural, political, and social policies. They provided support for Neo-Confucianism, expressed by the 12th century scholar Zhu Xi, which combined the values of Confucius with Buddhist philosophy. And they made sure that formal education in China focused on Confucian thought and values. The Neo-Confucian tradition was the reigning imperial ideology from the 14th to the early 20th century. Population and urban growth encouraged the start of a vibrant popular culture in Chinese cities. European missionaries reintroduced Roman Catholic Christianity to China and acquainted Chinese intellectuals with European science and technology. Neo-Confucianism and Pulp Fiction. The Ming and Qing emperors supported educational programs so that more students could study for the civil service examinations, which focused on Confucian texts. The Ming Emperor Yongle supported the making of the Yongle Encyclopedia, a collection of Chinese philosophical, literary, and historical texts that filled 23,000 scrolls. Kang Qi's collection of books and Qiang Long's complete library of the four treasuries was similar to Yongle's text. Many urban residents were literate merchants who preferred entertainment more intellectually engaging, for example, popular novels. Printing produced books cheaply and in mass quantities. Many of the novels weren't written well, but their stories were appealing. Many popular novels offered thoughtful reflections on the world and human affairs. Some popular novels included The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, The Dream of the Red Chamber, and Journey to the West. The Return of Christianity to China. The Italian Jesuit Matteo Ricci founded the Jesuit mission and aimed to convert China to Roman Catholicism. Ricci studied Chinese language and literature and impressed his hosts with European science. The Jesuits compared Christianity to Chinese cultural traditions and allowed converts to continue venerating their ancestors. However, Chinese hesitated to adopt Christianity because it claimed to be the only true religion, implying the inferiority of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. The Franciscans and Dominicans complained to the Pope about their rivals' tolerance of Chinese tradition, leading to the early 18th century order for missionaries in China to suppress it with European services. Emperor Kang Qi then ordered an end of Christianity's preaching in China. By the mid-18th century, the mission ended. The Jesuits introduced China to Europe through their writings, describing China as an orderly and rational society. In the 18th century, European rulers started to create their own civil service bureaucracies based on the Confucian civil service system. Philosophers sought Confucianism, an alternative ethical and moral foundation to Christianity.
The Tokugawa Shogunate. Tokugawa Ieyasu established the Bakufu, which was a temporary government and also called a tent government. And during this time, shoguns would rule this area until the end of the Tokugawa era. They needed to control the daimyos, who were lords that controlled hereditary land holdings and their own government and education. So, to control them, the government implemented the alternate attendance policy, which made daimyo families go to Edo, and they would have to go to Tokugawa court every other year. And to do basic things like leave and get married to others, they had to get permission from the shogun. Edicts in 1930 had to stop foreign trade relations because of the fear of Spanish ruining their control of the daimyos. But there were still small amounts of Chinese and Dutch merchants at the port city of Nagasaki. Japan carried on flourishing trade with China, Korea, and Taiwan, and Dutch merchants would regularly bring news of Europe as well as the larger world affairs. So, European influence still arrived even with these restrictions. Economic and social change. Their social hierarchy basically did a 360, and their agriculture production from the 1600s to the 1700s doubled with new crops, methods, fertilizer, and irrigation, which caused Japan's population to rise from 22 million to 29 million, but it grew to 32 million people with control of populations and the higher living standards. Tokugawa officials wanted to limit the amount of daimyos and samurai and wanted to change them from elites to bureaucrats, which led many going into debt to rice brokers. So, merchants became very wealthy and cities began to flourish while they were becoming wealthy. Rice dealers, pawnbrokers, and sake merchants controlled a good amount of the economy and even paid for an elite rank and marriage to improve their social status. And that's why it basically did a 360, and that's how their economy changed as well as their social lives changed. And on the right is a hierarchy of the Tokugawa era. Neo-Confucianism and the Floating Worlds. Neo-Confucianism was promoted during this era in Japan, which gave emphasis on piety and loyalty. Japan wanted their own identity despite their debt to China, so they gave emphasis on folk tradition as well as Shinto religion, and they called this native learning. They also had Japanese classics in schools. In the 17th century and 18th century, middle-class culture began to flourish in big cities like Kyoto, Edo, and Osaka for the appetites of the middle-class people. The Yukio, also called floating islands, were entertainment centers that gave escape from Tokugawa society in the Bakufu. With different authors who wrote books about love, it took away from just the normal Neo-Confucian treaties. There were also different dramas called kabuki and bunraku, which also expanded Japan's entertainment and diversion. Christianity and Dutch learning. Jesuits, starting when Francis Xavier traveled to Japan in 1549, went to Japan looking for converts, and they were successful with daimyos because they wanted to trade and they wanted military from Europeans. They also wanted gunpowder for their military. But they got backlash from shoguns because of the chance that they would become allies and also from other religions. There was also anti-Christian campaigns which led to many executions of Christians. Dutch learning also came into play when Dutch merchants were trading in the Nagasaki port, and they brought information from Europe and also other places in the larger world. They also used Dutch art to learn more about science and medical things, and scientific theories were also used to develop different drawing techniques.